In this video, I'll show you what are the main challenges when writing a statement of applicability according to ISO 27001 and how to speed the things up using software like Conformio. Now, the purpose of a statement of applicability is to define which controls from the Annex A are applicable and which are not. And there are 93 controls, and none of these controls are mandatory, which means that you can define which are relevant for your company or not. So it's actually interesting that ISO 27001 does not prescribe which of these controls are mandatory, but it insists that you perform a very strict process when determining which controls are applicable and which are not. And this process basically means that you have to identify all the security requirements from stakeholders and all the unacceptable risks, and then based on those inputs define which controls are applicable in a statement of applicability. Let's add here in this register of requirements, let's add a new requirement. Let's say this is a GDPR. So we select the legal and contractual requirement, status, let's say non-compliant, interested party. This is basically the government. Description of the requirement. So GDPR article 32. This is the article about protection of personal data. We put in here some date, country, so we can actually put European Union because this is a EU regulation. And so this is related to an area of privacy. So I selected here because this is important, as you will see later on. This is how it connects to statement of applicability. Responsible person, you put someone in, and you also select which regulation this is. So basically this is the one, GDPR is this one here already suggested. And then you basically simply click submit, and you will see that this new requirement is entered here. Now, when you go for this statement of applicability, you will see that for this particular control 5.34, privacy and protection of personally identifiable information, you will see this GDPR is already mentioned here as the justification because this information came directly from Register of Requirements. A similar thing here in the risk register when you enter some risks that are not acceptable. So in this case, let's say asset is production facilities, lack of access controls to facilities, rooms or offices, threat is a manipulation of destruction of equipment. Then the software automatically suggested several controls, amongst them is 8.5.15. And when we switch to statement of applicability, you can see that this control is automatically marked as applicable and the reference to risk is automatically made here, and of course the implementation method is already suggested. And by the way, besides this information whether a control is applicable, the control name, the control ID, the justification and the implementation method, all of these are mandatory elements of statement of applicability. You also have this color which shows what is the status of a particular control, and actually you can see these statuses here in this legend. So basically in this case red means that the controls need to be reviewed. Now you might wonder what happens if some of these controls are left unchecked, meaning that they're left unapplicable. Now you can always make them applicable even though that there are no directly related risks or requirements, because of course the auditor wouldn't mind if you increase your level of security, and then you simply have to define that the justification for applying this control is the management decision. For example, for this control 5.14, information transfer, when you click it and make it applicable, Conformio automatically suggests that this is per management decision, and of course automatically suggests the document through which this control will be implemented. Since ISO 27001 does not define any of these controls as mandatory, there is also no minimum number of controls that you have to apply. But from my experience, in most cases, companies select at least 85 controls out of 93 as applicable, because as you will see, most of these controls are common sense and most of these controls are already applied in your company. So larger companies will typically have all 93 marked as applicable, whereas smaller ones might go below 90. But again, I didn't see ever a case where a company went below 85. For example, you might say that this control 8.28, secure coding, is not applicable for your company since you do not have software development, and this would be fine. However, if you do have outsourced software developers, then 8.30 outsourced development would be applicable for your company, as well as security testing in development and acceptance, because if you do have outsourced developers, then you also have to make sure that this code is tested, which means that this control would also be applicable for your company. For implementation methods, typically you would refer to policies or procedures which describe in more detail how a particular control is implemented. But in some cases, you can actually write down simply which kind of technology you're using or which kind of process you're using within Statement of Applicability. And this is usually done in cases if this description is very short. Because if you have a longer description, then it's better and easier to create a document around it. Now, this doesn't mean that you will create a document separately for each and every control, especially if you are a smaller company. This is not something that would be recommendable. So for a smaller company, you would typically have one document covering several controls. And for implementation method, you might also write particular tasks for particular people in your company. So let's say that we mark this control change management as applicable, and Conformio automatically suggests this security procedures for IT department as a document through which change management will be defined. If you do not want this document, you simply delete it. And then you can add, let's say, a task for a particular person on what needs to be done. So for example, approve all changes to production systems through Jira. And you have to assign it to someone, add a description if you want, and save it. And this way, this task will appear in Conformio for this particular person on his or her to-do list. Or if you do not want a task, you can simply add a textual description. For example, here you simply write all changes to production systems must be approved through Jira, add, and then this is your implementation method. Regarding statuses of each control, typically you would have a status that the control is already implemented, or that it's under implementation, or that it is planned, meaning that it didn't start yet. For example, you can see here that these two controls have the status of review needed, but when I go into this access control policy or this security procedures for IT department, and when I approve these documents, then these statuses in the statement of applicability will automatically change to status implemented. So to conclude, as you can see, Statement of Applicability becomes basically a central document in your ISMS because it shows you your whole security posture. It shows which controls you want to implement, why do you want to implement them, what is their status, how they are implemented, and so on. And this is also why a certification auditor will use this document as a main document from which he or she will start the audit, because again, it tells him everything and basically tells the auditor exactly what to audit and where. So make sure that you do this statement of applicability properly, not only because of the certification auditor, but because it actually helps you manage security in your company in a much more transparent and easier way. Hope this was helpful. And to sign up for a free trial of Conformio, you can click the link in the description below and you'll be able to try how this statement of applicability and other features in Conformio work. And if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. And you can also subscribe to my YouTube channel not to miss any new videos, and I publish videos about ISO 27001 every week. Thanks for watching.